Hey, this is Mark Altman. Have you been looking for the ultimate Star Trek podcast? Well, check out Inglorious Treksperts as we take you, well, as we boldly go, where no one has gone before, exploring the incredible history of Star Trek and beyond.
Back in the 70s and 80s, before the advent of VHS, chances are, if you saw a classic movie, it was on the 4:30 movie. With their famous theme weeks, it was a chance to see movies you never saw and get reacquainted with some old classics. So now, join us for the 4:30 movie.
Welcome to War Movie Week on the 4:30 movie. This is Mark A. Altman, and in honor of Veterans Day this week, we are celebrating great war movies. I'm here, as always, with TV writer-producer Steven Melching.
Hello. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Concept designer Daren Dochterman.
Hey.
And film and TV writer Ashley E. Miller.
Hello.
And of course, I'm Mark A. Altman, and we're thrilled to have you here for another exciting week on the 4:30 movie. This week, the theme is war movies. Now, Steve Melching had suggested perhaps separating this up into the Atlantic Theater and the Pacific Theater and dividing it by World War I.
I mean, war is such a fertile ground topic for film. I mean,
yes.
it just...
What is it good for?
There's nothing more dramatic.
Absolutely
The
nothing.
stakes can't possibly be higher.
And I used to see a lot of movies at Pacific theaters. So
Yeah, in fact, Pacific Theaters, I think, actually owns the ArcLight.
Yeah.
So I see movies in the Pacific Theater all the time.
But but I think that obviously there's going to be an abundance of riches. And I think it's important to say on this Veterans Day that to all you veterans out there, people in the armed services, thank you for defending the values on which this country stands and protecting us and being in the armed services. And we thank you. And, as much as we'll be joking around during this, Veterans Day is a solemn holiday honoring people who have given more of just
unimaginable
themselves.
sacrifices that have been made over the last 200 years plus of our country's history.
What about the veterans of the Revolutionary War?
I said 200 plus.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a plus in that.
Okay.
there's a plus.
It's like a plus one.
There's always a plus.
I couldn't do that much math.
As we all know, there are no good Revolutionary War movies, however, so it's probably...
Nope, you're right. I was about to say Last of the Mohicans, but that's a French and Indian War movie. Who knew? There's a great French and Indian War movie, but no great
Well, there's
Revolutionary
that,
War movie.
what is it, that musical?
Hamilton?
1776.
1776, but not a great movie.
1776?
Not a great movie, though.
1776.
Some people love it.
1976 is the movie about...
But it's not a great movie.
The Patriot, is that about?
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. Patriot's good.
yeah.
Patriot's probably the best of the Revolutionary War movies.
I've often thought that, I kind of wanted to do a Revolutionary War movie, write one myself, so maybe I will.
It's fertile ground for exploration.
Yeah.
It worked for Lin-Manuel Miranda, that's for sure. But we're not here to talk about Hamilton today. Although, because I talk about it enough at home with everyone else, I'm always talking about Hamilton. I'm sick of it.
I'm sorry. Mark. I'm sorry.
I can't get in the car without freaking Hamilton. I love Hamilton, but I'm so over it now. Okay, war movies. Let's, for those of you who don't know, these are fantasy theme weeks where we curate a week of theme weeks in homage to the great 4:30 movie.
Week of theme weeks.
A week of classic movies in homage to the classic movies of our youth, the 4:30 movie, and which had shows like the Planet of the Apes week and Sci-Fi week and all that. And so this week it's War Week on the 4:30 movie, and apparently my tongue is at war with the rest of me. And
It's Vincent Price week on the 4:30 War movie.
Yes.
Steve Melching, Monday. Start us off.
Well, I'm going to go traditional, old school.
Tradition.
I think like probably everyone at this table grew up in a time when World War II films were very popular. There have been dozens of fantastic films made about every aspect of
It
World
was a
War
very
II.
popular war.
It was.
Even though it was a sequel. No.
It was one of those sequels that was better than the original.
But it produced a tremendous amount of great films. And as I was growing up, so many of those films were making their way onto television. So they were on every weekend. There were different World War II films on. And my father was an Air Force officer and a war buff. And so he we would watch World War II films and documentaries like Victory at Sea together. And both of my grandparents served in World War II, one in the Army in the Pacific Theater and one in the Navy in the European theater. And so my film is a classic of the European theater and includes events that my grandfather participated in, and that is 1962's The Longest Day, which it may also be the longest film that we discuss here. We need to break it down over a couple days. But this is a film that was directed primarily by Ken Anakin. Some people believe the inspiration for the name of Anakin Skywalker.
Always bringing it back to Star Wars. We're not talking about Star Wars. We're talking about war movies.
Star Wars are wars.
Ken Anakin also directed a film called The Battle of the Bulge, which famously featured the line, "I've got a bad feeling about this." Interestingly. So anyway, The Longest
Also
Day.
had Wookiees.
And of course, the entire attack on the Death Star in the rough cut stage was comprised of dam busters.
Yeah, Star Wars very steeped, not just in samurai films and westerns, but World War II films. And as I was writing on the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, I would revisit a lot of these World War II films to kind of get into the George Lucas's original inspiration. So anyway, The Longest Day is a film that centers around the June 6 D-Day invasion at Normandy in France, and features an all-star cast. I mean, just listen to this cast. It stars John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, Sean Connery, Eddie Albert, Richard Burton, Peter Lawford, Rod Steiger, Gert Frobe, Edmund O'Brien, Paul Anka, Jeffrey Hunter, Richard Dawson, George Siegel, Sal Mineo, Red Buttons, Mel Ferrer, and Roddy McDowell.
Many of which have been on our podcast previously.
Are we sure it was Henry Ford? God damn it.
Oh my God, that's a deep callback to like week
Henry
3.
Fonda,
Henry
not
Fonda.
Glenn Ford.
You still can't get
Glenn Ford.
That's a callback to Superhero Week.
And Henry Fonda played Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who died during the war and is buried at Normandy Beach. So this is of the tradition of great 60s war films where it encompasses the entire event, in this case the D-Day invasion, and similarly to Tora Tora Tora, it tells the story from both sides of the conflict. They're cross-cutting between the Germans and their preparations or lack thereof for the invasion, and the Allies preparing and executing the invasion. Just as Pearl Harbor, you cut between the Japanese and the U.S. at Pearl Harbor. And some of the film was shot in the actual locations where these events occurred, including Pointe du Hoc and Saint-Mère-Église. Earlier this year, my wife and I had the opportunity to visit France, and if I might digress for a moment, I cannot recommend touring the Normandy Beach area highly enough. I would recommend arriving in Paris, spend a day or two in Paris, then rent a car. Rent it from the Orly Airport, not the Charles de Gaulle Airport. The Orly Airport is like the Burbank Airport, as Charles de Gaulle is to LAX. Get your car, drive out to the coast. We stayed in the town of Bayeux, which is very close to the invasion beaches, and
Don't take a troop transport.
Do not take
Whatever
a troop
you
transport.
do.
They're very cold and drafty. Don't do a day trip from Paris because you'll spend half the day in a frickin' bus. These day trips are phenomenal. We did one, it lasted like 9 hours, and we visited Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Saint-Mère-Église, Pointe du Hoc, a German cemetery, the huge American cemetery there, and a couple other locations, including the site of that famous battle that Dick Winters participated in that was dramatized in Band of Brothers, the TV series. And I can tell you, I visited the day after our tour. I took the car alone and drove back to Normandy Beach, to Omaha Beach, and walked out onto the sand. And the films never do this justice. I mean, even a great film like Saving Private Ryan or Longest Day that dramatizes the Normandy invasions, these beaches are huge. And when the tide is out, you're talking about 400 or 500 yards of flat sand leading up to those bluffs. And I walked out there. This caught me totally by surprise. Walking out on the sand, I was suddenly hit with this tremendous wave of emotion. I don't know where it came from, but suddenly I found I was weeping standing there in this place. There's so much power there. But anyway, so back to the film. It's a terrific film. It's 3 hours long. It encompasses not only the preparation, but you're following different groups of soldiers. You're following the airborne troops as they parachute and land in the wrong place at Saint-Mère-Église, where that famously a soldier got hung up on the church there and was hanging there helplessly during the attack. You're watching soldiers come ashore at Omaha Beach. You're watching the British soldiers come ashore at their landing beach. And most remarkably, you're watching the Army Rangers assaulting the Pointe du Hoc, which is this promontory cliff that had supposed to have German big guns there that could hit both of the Utah and Omaha beaches. And the Rangers had to land on this narrow strip of rocky beach and use these grappling guns to fire rope ladders and ropes to the top of these 100-foot cliffs and then scale these cliffs while they're under fire from German soldiers, a force triple their size. And somehow these guys managed to get up those cliffs and take out this German garrison there and then hold it for several days because their reinforcements had been rerouted to Utah Beach. Right. So it's really it's a phenomenal battle, and all these battles are very well realized in the film. There's a cast of thousands, and it's just a very it's an entertaining but reasonably historically accurate portrayal of the Normandy attack.
Yeah, I agree. It's a excellent film in terms of filmmaking. It's extremely well done. Of course, the cast of everyone you've ever heard of before in the early '60s, and it's also very moving, and it doesn't feel like 3 hours when you're watching it, which is also a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much that's going on, and even kind of given, I was going to say, the limitations of filmmaking at the time. It's just, it feels, the cuts don't feel like you're sitting in one place just sort of watching dudes run around. And I would say it's probably the most successful depiction of something like that this side of Saving Private Ryan, just in terms of capturing that scale and capturing the intensity of the conflict. And by that I mean like the first half an hour of Saving Private Ryan, which I think is brilliant, and then the rest of the movie happens. But no, I think Longest Day is great.
And it really sets off this series of giant military spectacles with these all-star casts. People think of the all-star cast as sort of a relic of the disaster film era of the 70s, but it really starts in the 60s with movies like this. And because, you get into the 70s with stuff like Midway, and then, of course, later in the 60s, Tora, with these giant all-star casts. And
Great Escape.
That's a different kind of...
Right.
These are, and we'll get to the Great Escape, I have a feeling.
But yeah, my grandfather actually drove landing craft at on the landing beaches, so he was there, and he was one of those veterans who never talked about his war experiences until after Saving Private Ryan came out.
I think you've explained the reason why you had a wave of emotion.
Yeah,
that's why.
Yeah. He showed me once a piece of shrapnel that bounced off his helmet, presumably from German anti-aircraft fire. It was this shrapnel was just raining out of the sky all day during this incredible. I mean, it's hard to imagine. There were thousands of ships with tens of thousands of soldiers. It's hard to imagine the scale of this event. Longest Day goes a long way towards sort of dramatizing that, but it's hard to imagine.
Okay, Longest Day. We're starting out with the Normandy invasion on Monday.
And we're out of time. Good night, everybody.
And 3 hours. It's Monday and Tuesday. So Tuesday, Daren. What's
Tuesday? I'm going to take us back to the time of the Civil War with Ed Zwick's Glory.
Oh, good choice.
I think it's a really good representation of the Civil War period. I think it has a bunch of great actors in it. It's a well-made movie. There are parts that are a little sort of lightweight and a little TV movie-ish. However, the performances specifically of Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman are amazing.
Yeah.
And it's an extremely moving story, and it's a tearjerker at the end when you've been with all these people for the whole film, and it doesn't turn out nice. So it's one of my favorites, and it's
Great James Horner score, too.
amazing James Horner score that isn't as derivative as his other ones.
Yes.
But he used it a lot later, so that's a good mark for him.
Interesting choice. Ashley?
What?
So I guess no one else wants to talk about Glory.
I saw Glory, probably 3 or 4 times when it came out. I thought it was terrific as well, and the cast was great. The costuming, the location photography. It's a very handsomely produced film.
And it amazingly has some good facial hair appliances, other than Gettysburg, which came out at almost the same time, which looked like a trip to Woolworths.
Wasn't Gettysburg the one that Ted Turner financed?
Yes.
Because he was obsessed with the Battle of
Correct,
Gettysburg.
correct.
And it was a total vanity project and just not very good. Glory, on the other hand, is a really remarkable
amazing.
movie.
Based on a true story, really, at the time, a story that nobody really knew about.
Right.
Celebrating the role of, freed slaves, putting on the uniform of the Union to go back to fight to free the South.
The thing that separates Glory from, certainly from Gettysburg, and honestly from a lot of war movies that depict war, is that I think it was less interested in depicting events and making sure the audience sees all the stuff that's going on than it is about telling a story about the journey these characters are on together and their
people
attitudes.
involved.
Yes, right. It's like they have these attitudes toward one another at the beginning that evolve, and it's like it's the evolution of those relationships, and how they all find each other that really makes the ending of that movie work. We're not borrowing emotions to feel something when we watch it, and it's not kind of imposing on it. Oh well, we're sad because
we go on the journey with them.
That's
and
exactly
that's why.
right. We care, and it's a very different kind of film in that way. And I think in a lot of ways, Ed Zwick chased that movie. After that movie, I think he kind of chased what he accomplished in Glory in other films. I don't know that he ever quite got there. I'm thinking kind of specifically of like
he
Courage
didn't.
Under Fire.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people at that point had known Denzel from saying Elsewhere and stuff, but this is a movie that really cemented him as one of our most prized actors. He got nominated Best Supporting Actor for that movie, and he's just it's a spectacular performance. And as you said, Morgan Freeman's great in it, and Matthew Broderick, but really Denzel's performance is a tour de force, and it's a really terrific film. And I don't think Ed Zwick has ever done a movie that's of that level again. He's done some other interesting work, but nothing of that caliber.
And the cinematography was by Freddie Francis, who has done a lot of wonderful work with David Lynch and other filmmakers. He won the Academy Award.
Let us not forget, You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, I forgot it.
You
drift through the years.
or so it seems. Okay, Glory. That was Glory for Tuesday. Ashley, Wednesday.
Okay. So for Wednesday, this movie was one of my very favorites when I was a kid. I think in large part because it was a movie that my father loved and loves. He's still with us. And we would watch that together. And he was The Hunger. It was The Hunger. It was super awkward, but less awkward than if I had watched it with my mom. No, he was a Vietnam vet and all this, and it was always, he didn't really watch a lot of war movies. He just didn't. But Kelly's Heroes
Mm.
was one that we watched quite a bit.
Right.
Like whenever it was on, it was on. It like The Longest Day, it's an all-star cast.
Yeah.
It's Clint Eastwood playing Clint Eastwood, Telly Savalas, Don Rickles,
Yeah.
Donald Sutherland. It's just this amazing cast. And what's kind of special about it, and you don't really think about it this way because now it's 2018 and this was like 1965 or something like that. And 1965, directed by Brian Hutton, who directed Where Eagles Dare, which is a great World War II adventure film.
And featuring John Landis as the PA.
That's right. He was a
Really?
PA. Yeah. That's
I'll
right.
be goddamn.
On Kelly's
So,
Heroes.
we don't think of it as being a movie that was a contemporary take on World War II, but that's really what it was.
Right.
Donald Sutherland in that movie, playing Oddball, this like whacked out, totally high, beat poet.
Stop with the negative waves, man.
I'm drinking some wine, eating some cheese, catching some rays. It's like, don't hit me with those negative waves so early in the morning. It's going to be a Mother Beautiful bridge. And his relationship with Crap Game, but all of that was very anachronistic.
Yeah.
But it was awesome, and it was kind of a send up
Right.
of movies like The Longest Day. I mean, it was. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
look,
it's the postmodern World War II movie.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's really the first postmodern
Yeah.
World War II movie, and it's this great heist. It's this story that you wouldn't expect. It's almost cynical in that you have like this group of kind of very kind of downtrodden, beat up, World War II heroes who realize that there is a shitload of gold to be had in this little
Nazi
town.
gold.
Nazi gold. That they essentially mount their own operation to go and
Go
retrieve.
behind enemy lines to rob this bank.
It's awesome. And Carol O'Connor. Sorry. Harold Connor plays the American general, who realizes what's going on, thinks that these guys are basically mounting this effort to liberate this town, and that they're going to succeed, and then decides to go out and get in front of it. It's just fantastic in every way, and it's joyful, it's cool, and there are actually real moments of tension, and it sends up everything. There's a great scene that takes place in a minefield when they're trying to get everybody across, and the tension feels real. And then there is a showdown with a tiger tank that is just fantastic. And Hutton shoots it like it's a Sergio Leone spaghetti western because he knows who he's got, right? He's got Clint Eastwood. He's got the man with no name. And so it's all it's even like an Ennio Morricone score, like this sort of happening, sort of aping that. It's like all the extreme close-ups. But, instead of sort of going to the gun, you sort of go to the tank turret, sort of turning around. And it has the most wonderful resolution. Like, how do they win that fight with the tiger tank? It's amazing. It's like they do a deal.
Make
They
a
do
deal
a deal
with
with
the
the
Germans.
Nazis. Maybe he's a Republican. Like they do a deal with the Nazi to turn the tiger tank around. You just turn that around, man, and just go. I cannot say enough happy, positive things about Kelly's Heroes. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it. It's so
It's probably
much fun.
a movie that a lot of people haven't seen, and I love that Donald Sutherland. This always tickled me, and I still get a smile thinking about it when he's mounted these big speakers on his tank.
Yeah.
And he's playing like I've been working on the railroad as they're assaulting this train depot. I mean,
Right?
it scares the hell out of you. Know, I mean, it's
He was
so
there
funny.
way before Apocalypse Now, right? And then it has like this great, or at least I love it anyway, song by the Mike Curb congregation, Burning Bridges at the end. And it's like, I was going to, why don't we do that anymore? You have like the end credits where it's got like the pictures of like the characters and they sort of pop up and there's the actor. It's just,
And you got
I
kind of
love
a
that
goofy
shit.
pop song.
Yeah.
It's a really fun movie.
Well, I was going to say, in a way, it really is a precursor to another terrific movie, the Iraqi war film, Three Kings.
Three Kings,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which you can see the DNA of Kelly's Heroes in Three Kings, which is a terrific film by David O. Russell that's, I was going to say more recent, but when you think about it, it's not that recent.
Right.
Yeah.
It is-
Gulf War I set a similar concept. A group of soldiers trying to steal a bunch of treasures from Saddam Hussein.
we may be as removed from that war in time as Kelly's Heroes was
Yeah.
for World War II.
I think you're about right. That's
Yeah.
about right.
God, that's crazy when you put it in that kind of context.
Yeah.
Stop putting things into context, Adam.
Damn it.
What are you trying to do?
Allow me to decontextualize for you.
That's a great choice for Wednesday, Kelly's Heroes. But it's interesting. We've had Longest Day, Glory, Kelly's Heroes. Not the obvious choices for War Week. My choice is a film that I think it's a legendary battle. It's one that changed the course of history and
Star Wars.
Well, I was going to say Rogue One. We got the plans to. No, I'm not going to go there because again we're talking the Veterans Day and while but there's an abundance of riches, and it's very hard to sort of narrow it down to just one. My initial pick was and is Love and Death. It's about the Napoleonic Wars. Woody Allen plays the young Boris Grushenko. Diane Keaton is Sonja, and they to stop the war plan to assassinate Napoleon. It is the last of quote unquote Woody Allen's early funny ones, and just a brilliantly, beautifully shot and scored a film. It was his last film before Annie Hall. But no, I'm not going to go with Love and Death. I just wanted to get Love and Death in there. It really, again, I'm sort of vexed because I was toying with I can't do Winds of War, which was a soapy TV miniseries. Which I adored as a kid. The wonderful Americanization of Emily, which is a terrific film with James Garner and James Coburn. It ties into Normandy. The whole plot is they want James Garner to be the last dead man on Omaha Beach because they want that to be the Navy. And it's a great black comedy directed by Herbert Ross. But again, I don't think of sufficient scope, and I think of it more as a comedy. And the same way, MASH is also a phenomenal satire on the Korean War, really a satire of Vietnam. But I think that's should be Robert Altman Week or Altman Week or
Isn't every week Altman Week?
here on the 430 movie and comedy week. So it really comes down to me to two films.
Jesus,
Two more
make
films.
up your mind.
It really comes down to two
We
films.
all could mention 5 films if we wanted to.
But
Pick your favorite. No, pick your
Well, I
favorite.
really
Mark.
can't decide. One, of course, is John Sturges' masterpiece, The Great Escape.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
With an amazing all-star cast about British and American POWs trapped behind enemy lines who plan, and is all based on a real story, the largest prisoner of war breakout in the history of war. Richard Attenborough, the director, actually, who is the kindly old grandfather in Jurassic Park, plays this like badass MI6 guy,
Mr. X.
Mr. X in
Big X.
and Steve McQueen. It has that iconic motorcycle chase. Elmer Bernstein's one of many great
It's
scores,
glorious, yeah.
but it's probably his best. So I absolutely love The Great Escape, and watched it with my father many times and was never embarrassed. So just a brilliant movie, and I'm a huge fan of John Sturges. Dirty Dozen was something else I thought about, but The Great Escape just inches it out because, again, based on a real story and more laudable characters than in The Dirty Dozen. But at the end of the day, I think I have to go, and it's hard because I truly love The Great Escape. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But I think I have to go with the triptych of Apocalypse Now, Redux, and Hearts of Darkness.
Oh.
That was 7 movies, Mark. You just programmed a week.
I'm very indecisive. Okay, so let's say Apocalypse Now.
You need
Okay.
to pick
we'll
one of
go.
those.
I'm going to pick Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now, it was a bunch of movies that came out in the late 70s dealing with America's role in Vietnam. There was Coming Home, The Deer Hunter, and finally Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece, Apocalypse Now, it was infamous.
82.
What?
79.
79.
Was it 79?
It was 79, yeah.
Oh, geez, I
79.
lost 2 years in there.
Yeah. Not the year of Star Trek. Not the year of Star Trek 2. The year of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Aaron Boy.
You're an Aaron Boy sent by-
But of course, it's the famous line from Francis Coppola in Hearts of Darkness: "We're not making a movie about war. We're living
In
a war."
a way.
And the story of Apocalypse Now making the movie is almost as amazing as the film itself. It's documented in Hearts of Darkness, also Eleanor Coppola's book Notes, which is a terrific book about the making of Apocalypse Now. It's not an oral history like my own book about the history of Battlestar Galactica, another great war far beyond the stars. But Apocalypse Now, to
So
me,
Say We All, right?
is one of the most remarkable feats of pre-CG filmmaking, where everything's done practically. There's a famous story of how during the great helicopter attack where they're playing Wagner, the Filipino army took their helicopters back to fight real rebels. Right? Like, where are the helicopters going? And you don't have that when you're creating helicopters in the computer. And for whatever its flaws are, of which there are definitely flaws, including the meandering finale with Marlon Brando, in which, when Marlon Brando showed up as this exhausted guy on set, Coppola just remembered him from Godfather, and he's like, what am I going to do with this? And they basically had to rewrite it. And then, of course, Marlon Brando wanted to sort of experiment and figure out what this character of Kurtz was. It's all based on the Conrad book, Hearts of Darkness.
Loosely.
And loosely, yeah. It's inspired by, I should say. But this trip downriver in which it becomes more and more dark, and it's like a giant snake uncoiling. And so we go from sort of the fun, crazy, MASH-like antics of Colonel Kilgore, and I love the smell of napalm in the morning, by the time we get to the severed heads and the true Heart of Darkness at the end of Martin Sheen's journey. It's a remarkable movie. It is the stuff of legend. It is what great movie making and great movie makers are all about. So I have to go with Apocalypse Now.
I think that's a very reasonable thing to choose for a movie about war. But you have to think of all the wasted time that he did making a lot of footage that he never used. And I think that's far more wasteful than wasting Marlon Brando's time on the film. Does anyone see my Fruit Loops anywhere?
And I don't know how many of you have seen Apocalypse Now Redux, but it's an interesting. It's like the Close Encounter special edition.
It's an interesting experiment. I don't think it's successful.
No, I don't either. And I think that you don't need the French plantation sequence. You don't need a lot of that. And I love at least that Coppola, rather than try and say this is now the version of the film, he didn't pull a Lucas, and you will never see the original Apocalypse Now again.
Right.
Actually, when they came out on Blu-ray, it was the three versions. It was Apocalypse Now Redux, and Hearts of Darkness, which is how you want every iteration. It's like the Blade Runner collection, So it is interesting, and if you haven't seen Redux, it's worth watching once. But really, I think Apocalypse Now in its original theatrical form, it was really interesting because it didn't have credits, and they gave out the credits on a little cardboard giveaway at theaters at the time, and just a great
movie. Features one of my favorite set pieces of all time in a war film. That helicopter assault sequence is absolutely stunning. The sheer number of helicopters that he had up there, some of those shots are just incredible. The pyrotechnics, the special effects they had going off on the ground.
And unfortunately, the impact of it has been lessened over the years because so many people have ripped it off.
Yeah, and have parried it as well.
And it has become less in our minds than what it was originally. And when it was originally out, it was mind-blowing.
And let me tell you, if you've never seen this film on a big screen and you get the opportunity, that is by far, I mean, any of these movies we talk about are best experienced on a big screen, but this film in particular.
Except Cloak and Dagger.
The smaller the better.
Yeah, that's going to be better on your
but that helicopter assault, or any of these, Walter Murch's sound design is amazing in a 6-track Dolby.
I saw Apocalypse Now in Telluride, in Elks Park, in the rain, which is the way to watch Apocalypse Now. Just pouring, and you're on this blanket, and it's like you're on a rain parka, and it's cold, and it's damp, and it's wet, and it's like fantastic. It's like the ultimate way to watch Apocalypse Now.
Well, I don't know. I saw Apocalypse Now and Telluride a few years later in 70 millimeter with Francis Coppola and John Milius.
Okay.
You got me beat. But we also saw it at the Egyptian with John Milius, which
Yes.
was wonderful. Was a wonderful screening. He had great stories.
Apocalypse Now taught me 3 things. 1, Charlie, don't surf. 2, napalm smells like victory. And 3, no. I
Always have an ending.
you should always
before
have an
you
ending
start
before
production.
you start shooting. Actually, I will say my favorite part of that movie is actually the completely bananas, insane, meandering third act with Brando. There is just something about it that turns that film into a horror movie. That I know obviously it doesn't.
It's the Storaro cinematography.
But it's like, it really does play that way. He feels like a monster, in the best possible way. It's like I think
he uses his girth to his advantage.
Yes.
You're just an errand boy sent by grocery clerks to collect the bill.
exactly. It's just, and Brando is weird, but kind of you can't not watch him, even when he's like
Magnetic.
saying whatever goes through his head. Swallowed a bug. Because he swallowed a bug as he was saying his lines. Although that is slightly less bananas than apparently what happened to him on the island of Dr. Moreau,
Yes.
where he was like he had earphones like hooked up, and so he could get his lines read to him and then say them. But they had it on the same frequency as the nearby air tower.
Yes.
So
it's
he
like
would
Spinal
start to
Tap.
sort of say things from the
What's not well known is how often big A-list actors now want that. Either instead of cue cards, what they get is they get the lines fed into them via an earpiece and don't even bother to memorize their lines. You know.
Well, if I can, for a second, sort of divert this back to Star Wars again. A lot of people don't realize that originally Apocalypse Now was going to be directed by George Lucas.
Right.
whoa.
He wrote the first script of it, or
They were going to make it in Vietnam in the
Vietnam.
late '60s.
yeah.
Wow.
And this is the project that got him interested in the less technologically advanced society defeating the higher technologically advanced society.
So this is what gave us
This is what gave us the Ewoks.
Oh my God.
But he was entrenched in
Can
this
I change
project
my
for,
vote?
for a long time, and up until a year before shooting, he was still going to do it. So that's an interesting story.
Wow.
Celebrate the love.
And of course, Harrison Ford has a small cameo playing Colonel Lucas
Yes.
Yes.
in the film.
In the interest of time, I suggest we pass both ways.
Never get out of the boat.
Find Colonel Kurtz and assassinate him with extreme
prejudice.
Now, it's very quotable. It's gorgeous. Vittorio Storaro, I believe,
Yes,
the
Storaro.
cinematographer. It's stunning. Sound design, of course, we mentioned before, groundbreaking.
It's filmmaking.
Yeah.
Writ
Pure
large.
cinema.
It's not iPhone.
Yeah.
It's not. Doesn't belong on an iPhone. You shouldn't even be able to buy it on an iPhone. You should only be able to see it in a theater. I mean, it's a remarkable film. I mean, it debuted in New York at the Ziegfeld, which is the kind of theater that it belongs in, which of course doesn't exist anymore. So it's sad. I mean, it ushered in, and again, United Artists thought this is the film that could break them. It broke, it was going to break Coppola, and it ended up not. It was not until Heaven's Gate a year later, which broke United Artists, because Apocalypse Now actually did well, and then Coppola survived Apocalypse Now only to be destroyed by Once from the Heart. But
it's stunning. It's amazing the film was ever finished. It was in production for how long? Like 2 years or something. Martin Sheen had a heart attack during production.
Wasn't he completely recast at some point? Or
No, it's Harvey Keitel.
Oh, okay.
Harvey
And they
Keitel,
shot
yeah.
for weeks before they fired Harvey Keitel and replaced him with Martin Sheen.
Jesus.
I mean, again,
Was it because
I
he kept
can't-
showing people his penis?
Not that I'm aware, but I'm it's not Eyes Wide Shut. But
Right.
I can't recommend enough the Hearts of Darkness documentary,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
just a remarkable documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now. It's crazy, and it also inspired Tropic Thunder to a
Right.
large to call it back to
Films about
films about filmmaking week.
So that brings us to Friday, doesn't it?
Friday.
What a day, Friday.
It's a wide open range. We
It
got
sure
a lot,
is.
You know, I'm thinking that we may have to revisit War Week later on.
World Week 2.
Look, I think we have Memorial Day coming up. That's a good time, but to revisit it. December 7th, of course, is the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So there's a lot of time to revisit these films.
I want to throw one out that I love watching over and over and over again. I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country.
Yeah, that was my pick for
When
Friday.
you put your hand in a pile of goo. I was going to suggest that one, too. We're talking, of course, about
Patton.
1970, winner
Also
of Best
written
Picture.
by Francis Ford Coppola.
Well, and directed by the great underrated director Franklin Schaffner,
Yes.
who you may recall from Planet of the Apes.
Yes, those of you who remember Planet of the Apes.
That was a little film.
A little film from the 60s.
The Charlton Heston.
But it's a glorious depiction of not only World War II, but of this amazing character that George C. Scott creates from George S. Patton, who was a crazy general.
Larger than life
larger than
figure.
life, even in reality. My pistols are not pearl handled; they're ivory handled. It's just amazing, and he is spot on, amazing during the entire film.
I read your book, Rommel.
You magnificent bastard! I read your book. I find that the most eminently quotable movie ever.
Yeah.
There's just so much, and I should have kissed the damn bastard. But it's just so good, and the musical score by Jerry Goldsmith is iconic, and it's just technically, it's the scope of it is amazing.
I mean, you're going from North Africa to Sicily to Italy, and then ultimately into Western Europe.
Yeah.
For the Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge.
And it's even better when you compare it to MacArthur, starring Gregory Peck,
Right.
which is terrible.
Yes.
Or
But watching
Inchon.
this character's journey, from itching to get his first command and get out into the field and take on Rommel and get into the fight, and his early successes, his rivalry with General Montgomery from the British forces.
Well, what about the audacious way in which the movie begins, standing in front of the American flag, breaking
Addressing
the
the
fourth
audience.
wall? I mean, it's such a magnificent movie, and it was definitely going to be my choice for Friday as well. I had a couple of other honorable mentions.
Yeah.
Dunkirk, which I think should have won the Oscar for Best Picture last year. Christopher Nolan's brilliant film, was beaten by Shape of Water. Not to take anything away from Guillermo, but Dunkirk, again, is pure cinema. The Hurt Locker, Catherine Bigelow's film. Good Morning Vietnam, which to me is probably the height of not only Barry Levinson's career, but also Ron Williams. Dirty Dozen we talked about. Bridge Over the River Kwai, to bring it back to Star Wars again. Alec Guinness.
Bridge over the River Kwai. I only have a limited wall space. I think I've mentioned before in my house, but Bridge on the River Kwai is one of those film posters that's on my wall. It's terrific.
Well, I'd like to throw one out for the kids.
Yeah, please.
For the kids.
For the kids. Inglourious Bastards. Mm-hmm. Inglourious Bastards is, in so many ways, ahistorical, I think is kind of the way to put it, in the sense that, it didn't happen. But it is
You mean Eli Roth did not kill Hitler?
He did not kill
I didn't
Hitler,
get that memo.
apparently. But that movie is just so fascinating. It is so well made. It's Tarantino at his, I don't think it's at his most insane, because that's a very high bar. But at his really super duper insane, and just these great scenes. You think about that movie as really just a collection of these sequences that fall into rough chronological order. Whether it's Christoph Waltz walking into the French farmhouse, talking about squirrels and whatever the hell it is that he's talking about for 20 pages. but you're riveted while the family is hiding underneath.
You know, it's audacious filmmaking. That first 10 minutes of that movie, regardless of what you think of the film, and I have problems with the film, the first 10 is among the great scenes. And it's funny, it's like True Romance. True Romance is not a great movie, but, and you know, Tony Scott's film written by Quentin, but there are some of the greatest scenes ever.
It's riveting. The scene in the underground bar, right?
Yes.
Absolutely riveting.
Because he's just he understands
suspense.
tension exactly and how to make it work. Because the things that
It's
he lets
unbearable.
you know. Oh, totally. Or things as funny as the meeting with Churchill,
Yeah.
where you realize it's this 3 dudes in a room that's enormous, and the way that he shoots it, it's like they're calling to each other from different corners of the room.
Or the way he scores it.
Yeah.
When Melanie Laurent is going to light the theater on fire, and he's scoring it with David Bowie's putting out fire with gasoline. I mean, it's pure Quentin.
It totally is, and I think the reason I would put it up for Friday is because, it's probably the most. Maybe it isn't, but it's except for Dunkirk, which obviously happened very, very recently. But it is the most contemporary in the sense of a contemporary sensibility, sort of the irony of it. It's kind of the Kelly's Heroes of like this generation. It's Quentin Tarantino's Kelly's Heroes.
It's like an alternate reality, hyper alternate reality. I really like this movie too. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite Tarantino films to rewatch. I find it really rewatchable.
Right. It's like we're in the Nazi killing business, and business is booming.
Margarete.
I think it'd be great for Tarantino week. I don't think you can end a Veterans Day week or a movie about war films in which it trivializes a war by ending the movie with Hitler being killed by Eli Roth. I love Inglourious Basterds. I mean, like I said, it's some brilliant scenes, but I think it's a sort of disrespectful choice for Friday. I feel like Patton is, a true classic and a masterpiece. Sort of ending with sort of a snarky meta take on war. It doesn't feel right to me, but
Well, let me throw out one more then. I love Patton, and I was going to suggest it myself, but this Veterans Day actually marks the 100th year since the end of World War I. Mm-hmm. So I think we should talk about
Wonder Woman.
Yes, Wonder Woman. No. Paths of Glory. Stanley Kubrick's.
I thought you were going to say All Quiet on the Western Front, but okay.
Paths of Glory. That's a terrific film as well. But Paths of Glory, Kirk Douglas as a soldier tasked with defending 3 soldiers selected at random to face punishment for refusing to obey a ridiculous order to go over the top and a fruitless charge across no man's land. It's one of Kubrick's earlier films. Mm-hmm. I want to say maybe his third.
Well, it's the reason that Kirk Douglas agreed to do Spartacus, and it wanted Kubrick specifically to do Spartacus because they had a really good experience on Paths of Glory.
And he delivers just an outstanding performance. All the acting is terrific in that movie. And speaking of suspense, it's an incredibly suspenseful movie because you know that these poor guys are getting railroaded. Right. There's no way they're getting out from under this, and they're facing the death penalty for desertion or failure to obey orders. Right. And Kirk Douglas mounts a robust defense of them in the face of this horrible injustice, and it's really speaks to the insanity and cruelty of war.
And there again, the cinematography and the direction is
immaculate,
amazing,
beautiful.
Each frame is beautiful.
I kind of wonder why it's harder to come up with a list of World War I movies. I mean, maybe it's because so many filmmakers were World War II veterans, and they came out and they were just making movies about their experiences.
But also, it's not as cinematic a war because it's trench warfare, and so it's much more. You have people sitting in trenches, and it's not as cinematic. It's as World War II, which had this vast canvas and all these theaters of war that were so compelling.
Well, there were very varied theaters of war in World War I as well.
When the Americans hit, it was Pershing's plan was basically it was 1918 style shock and awe. It was we unloaded more artillery in the first day of that war than had been unloaded in the entirety by both sides of the American Civil War. Just boom. And then the Meuse Argonne, right, which is basically like this canopy of trees, and it's dark, and it's just there's smoke and fog everywhere. And not only that, the gas would seep down into the earth. And so people would run across this shit, and they would step on these little pockets of earth that would collapse underneath their feet. And poof, pockets of gas. I mean, you have to sort of sit back and think about like what that looked like. I know that our conception of the World War I experience was that, but by the time the Americans came to the war, Pershing's entire plan was we got to get the hell out of the trenches. We have to push. We have to go. I mean, it was those months were brutal, and they were intended to make the Germans believe that they could not win. And that the Americans were completely batshit nuts.
Actually, I wish you'd get excited about something on this podcast.
Me too.
But also that war, this is talking about history, marked a real turning point. This was the beginning of the industrialization of war, the modern war as we think of it.
Using
the
mustard
introduction
gas
of chemical warfare, tanks, machine guns, landmines, airplanes. I mean, the air war alone started with, we're only 10 years removed from the Wright brothers, and then by the end of that war, we're dogfighting at 10,000 feet. We're doing aerial reconnaissance behind enemy lines. You're having Zeppelins dropping bombs on London. I mean, it's a really quite a wide range. There were theaters of war in Africa. We saw that in Lawrence of Arabia.
Which we didn't talk about.
They were in Italy. I mean, it was a pretty more expansive war. It wasn't all just France.
It's the episode 1 of World War.
Right? Yeah.
The original.
But the other thing is also it's not as well documented because, you used to watch, remember the History Channel used to joke it was the World War II channel?
Yeah.
Sure.
Because that's all they had. They had the newsreel footage and they had, World War II was the most documented war for a certain period of time.
Right.
Whereas with World War I, you're really at the beginning of that, so it's not as
one of the
immediate
first wars
to
that
people.
had motion
I think.
picture film shot
Yes,
during
it is.
which is pretty
it
incredible.
is, but it's not as prolific as like with World War II. Like everything is.
And by the way, I believe this movie is coming out soon. Peter Jackson is making a documentary about World War I where he took archival footage and cleaned it up using algorithms to make it look like HD. I mean, it looks incredible.
Wow.
Speaking of great documentaries, the Netflix documentary about World War II, about Capra and
That's great. Five came
back.
It's great.
Now I guess that premiered on Netflix, so we have the eternal challenge of not being able to recommend that because it's I guess it's for TV, but it premiered on the festival circuit, I believe, and. That's Spielberg produced it. That would have been good for Spielberg Week.
So would War Horse.
Yes,
War Horse, another World War I film.
Yeah,
which I kind of like, honestly. God help me.
I wish I could say that, but that's okay.
I don't say that I love it, but I like it.
Okay, so the question is Friday. Ashley has suggested Inglourious Bastards. You put up Patton. We've had some other suggestions as well. Where are we going to land on this?
Patton.
Pass of Glory?
I think it's got it. I don't know. Well, I love Patton. I'm with Daren. I find it incredibly rewatch. Like Inglourious Bastards, I watch Patton probably twice a year.
Right. Plus, I don't do any voices from Paths of Glory.
You don't do Kirk Douglas? I have to say, for me, it's Patton also. I mean, Patton is sort of one of the definitive films about war, about a warrior, about a veteran, about the great George Patton.
He's such a fascinating character. This whole notion that he thinks that he is reincarnated, that he's been at all these battles throughout history.
And that theme of Goldsmith's, the reincarnation
the echoing
theme.
trumpet, the echoes of his life.
And the
his
fact that
experiences.
thinking about if he had been allowed to go forward, would we have had the Cold War?
If they'd just given him the gas.
Yeah.
Right.
You know? No, what an interesting guy. I mean, we could have a whole other podcast just about Patton.
It's Patton
and
Week.
crazy
The
shit.
scene
Right.
when there's that traffic jam at the crossroads,
Yeah.
and Patton just gets down in the mud
And starts directing traffic,
It's great.
You over there, move.
Well, Ashley, this is a democracy, not a dictatorship.
You know
have
what?
they made their argument?
They have made their argument. I love that movie, and
And
I
who's a
love
bigger
Patton.
inglorious bastard than Patton?
Nobody is a bigger. You know what? You're right. The biggest inglorious bastard of all, Patton.
Okay, so
we
Monday,
all.
The Longest Day. Tuesday, Glory. Wednesday, Kelly's Heroes. Thursday, Love and Death, The Great Escape. No. Thursday, Apocalypse Now. And ending War Week on the 4:30 movie, Patton. Well, I got to tell you, this is quite an interesting week, and anyone who decides to seek out these movies and at home won't be disappointed because they're all really masterpieces in their own way, and it's a great way to honor, not celebrate, but honor Veterans Day and the veterans who were out there looking out for their fellow Americans and ultimately the world. Because we are all connected. So I want to point out that you can check out Lore on Amazon now, which Ashley was a writer and producer on, and Resistance. Steve Melching wrote several episodes of Star Wars Resistance, which recently debuted on Disney. And, of course, we have all new 430 Movie swag available at 430movie.com. You can follow us on social media at 430 Movie Podcast.
And you never mentioned my name during that.
Yeah, man.
What?
You just skip over my name.
I
You
introduced
mention
you at the
Ashley.
beginning of the show.
I know, but you say Ashley's doing this, Steve's doing that. Okay, I'm not really doing anything right now, but that's okay.
Daren-
I'm working
Daren
making
Dochterman
T-shirts. I'm
has
making T-shirts. I'm doing the work, man.
Daren Dochterman has been more prolific than any elf in Santa's workshop. Every day there's new designs dropping,
It's crazy.
which are
Just
phenomenal.
when I think I got my favorite one, a new one comes out.
Every damn day.
And it is absolutely phenomenal, and we're deeply indebted to Darren's skill and technique for
thank you,
creating
Darren.
these
You can stop.
fantastic
That's quite
new
enough.
T-shirts. We encourage you, if you enjoyed this podcast, to please go on Apple Podcasts and rate us. 5 stars would be appreciated. Anything less, don't bother. You got more important things to do. And also, you can follow us directly on social media. Ashmaster Zero, Ashley, Steven Melching at Steve Melching, at Daren Dochterman, myself, Mark A. Altman at Twitter and Instagram. We'd also like to especially thank Electric Studios for once again being great hosts, and especially Bill Ritter behind the board, who makes us sound good, which is quite a talent.
You should hear us live.
Man.
So this was War Week. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode of the 430 Movie. Thank you.
At ease.